She found out in a stranger's kitchen. A man named Walt 70-something, a widower who had lived next door to her mother-in-law for 40 years. He had a geranium on the windowsill and photographs on the wall and hands that didn't shake when he told her. He said he hadn't slept the night before, said he'd gone back and forth on whether she deserved to know. He decided she did. What he told her that August morning changed everything Carol thought she understood about her own life. And the strange part, the part she still can't quite get over, is that the day had started so completely normally. She had baked a cherry pie. She was thinking about the electric bill. She had no idea that by the time she left that town she would not recognize her own husband. They left at 7 on a Saturday morning in August, the kind of morning where the air is already thick before the sun has fully cleared the trees. Dennis drove. Carol sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap watching Pennsylvania roll past the window fields of dry corn, a shuttered diner, a gas station with one pump wrapped in a plastic bag. The two-lane state highway that ran out toward Ruthstown passed through the kind of places that had been shrinking for 30 years and didn't seem to mind anymore. Carol had packed the night before. A cherry pie she'd baked Friday evening still in the carrier on the back seat. A pharmacy bag with Ruth's blood pressure medication, the refill she'd picked up Thursday on her lunch break. Small things. The kind of things you do without being asked after enough years. The car was quiet. Not uncomfortably so, just quiet the way long marriages get quiet when two people have stopped needing to fill the space between them with words. Carol's thoughts moved through the ordinary inventory of a Monday she hadn't reached yet. The electric bill needed to be paid online before the 15th. The price of ground beef at the store had gone up again. Her shift manager had given her a flat look yesterday when she asked to leave 40 minutes early for a dentist appointment, the kind of look that wasn't quite a reprimand but was working on it. Dennis spoke once, maybe 20 minutes out from Ruth's exit. He didn't look away from the road. "You get my mom's prescription?" Carol said yes. He nodded once and put both hands back on the wheel. That was the whole conversation for the last hour of the drive. She looked at him then. The soft line of his jaw, the way his hair had thinned back at the temples, the creases at the corners of his eyes that had deepened so gradually she couldn't have said when they got there. An ordinary man past 50. Her husband. She turned back to the window and watched another small town pass, a church, a dollar store. A row of houses with American flags on the porches, and thought about nothing in particular until the exit came up and Dennis put on the turn signal. 26 years together. You'd think that would be enough time to know someone. Turns out it's just enough time to stop looking. Ruthstown had maybe 800 people left, and that number was being generous. The main street had a pharmacy, a Dollar General, and 3 storefronts papered over long enough that nobody remembered what they used to be. Ruth's place sat at the edge of a side road, a white wood frame house with a front porch that had been listing slightly to the left for as long as Carol could remember. Dennis had been meaning to fix it for years. He hadn't gotten around to it. Ruth came out when they pulled into the gravel drive. 76 years old, a little slower on the steps than she used to be. But her back was straight and her expression was the same one it had always been, composed, watchful, giving nothing away. She went to Dennis first, put a hand on his arm, kissed him on the cheek. Then she looked at Carol and gave her a single nod. Not unfriendly exactly. Just brief. The same acknowledgement Carol had been receiving for 26 years, and she had long since stopped expecting anything different. Dennis grabbed the grocery bag from the back seat and followed his mother inside. Ruth was already talking as she went up the porch steps, something about the neighbors 2 doors down and a dog that had gotten into her garden. Their voices moved into the kitchen and became a low, steady murmur, the sound of a conversation that didn't require any effort because it had been happening for decades. Carol stood by the car for a moment, then reached in for the pie carrier and the pharmacy bag. She rolled her shoulders out, working loose the stiffness from 2.5 hours in the passenger seat, and walked slowly along the garden fence instead of going straight inside. Ruth's garden was serious work. Tomatoes staked in straight rows, squash plants sprawling at the far end, green beans climbing a wire trellis along the fence line. Carol touched one of the bean plants as she passed it, felt the warmth the leaves had been collecting all morning. The August heat sat on everything flat and heavy. She had eaten Carol's pie for 26 years and never once said she liked it. Carol knew she did. She'd caught her once standing alone in the pantry finishing a slice in the dark. That was the closest thing to warmth Ruth had ever shown her, and it wasn't even meant to be seen. From the kitchen came the low sound of Dennis's voice and Ruth's answering him. Carol stood at the fence and looked out at the yard next door, overgrown grass, an old lawn chair tipped on its side, and thought, without really meaning to, when was the last time she and Dennis had an actual conversation, not about the electric bill or what to pick up at the store or whether the car needed an oil change. Something real about something that mattered. She turned the question over and couldn't find the answer. Maybe 10 years ago. Maybe longer. She stood there in the heat and let it go because she had learned a long time ago that some questions were better left where they were. She didn't hear the man at the fence until he spoke. He was somewhere in his 70s, lean, his face weathered to a deep tan that made the gray of his eyes stand out. Faded work shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, both hands resting on the top rail of the low fence between the two properties. He had clearly been standing there for a while before he said anything. The stillness of someone who has made up his mind and is no longer in a hurry. "You're Dennis's wife." Not quite a question. Carol said yes. She told him her name. He nodded slowly. "I'm Walt. I've lived next door here going on 40 years. A pause that had weight to it. "I need to talk to you about your husband. There's something you should know." The pie carrier was still in her hand. She became aware of it suddenly, the way you notice something ordinary when everything around it goes strange. Her stomach dropped. She wanted to ask what he meant. The words were right there, but they didn't come out. She looked back at the house. The kitchen windows faced the other side. No one inside could see her. She could still hear the low sound of their voices. Dennis saying something, Ruth responding. An ordinary Saturday visit. She could have said no. She could have gone inside, poured herself a cup of coffee, and pretended she hadn't heard him. She still thinks about that sometimes. The version of herself that turned around. Walt had already let go of the fence rail. He was moving toward his gate, slow and deliberate, a man following through on a decision made well before this moment. He didn't look back to see if she was coming. Carol set the pie carrier down on top of the fence post. She didn't plan to. She just did it. And then she followed him through the gate, not fully understanding why, only that something in the way he moved, unhurried and carrying something heavy, made turning away feel like the wrong thing to do. The gate clicked shut behind her. Walt's house was small and clean. A kitchen table with an oilcloth cover worn pale at the edges. A geranium on the windowsill. Old photographs in wood frames on the wall, a young woman, children, a family from a long time ago. He pulled out a chair for her and sat down across the table. He folded his hands and looked at her the way a person looks when they have rehearsed what they're about to say and still aren't sure it's right. "I didn't sleep much last night," he said. "Went back and forth on whether to tell you. But if it were me, I'd want to know." He paused. "Your husband has another family. A woman named Patty in Millhaven, about 18 miles east of here. They have a daughter together. 14 years old. Her name is Lily." Carol heard the words. She understood them individually. They didn't arrange themselves into meaning right away. Walt explained how he knew. His doctor had been sending him to the medical clinic in Millhaven for follow-up appointments for the past couple of years, and he'd been taking the county bus out there twice a week. The first time he saw Dennis was about 2 years back. Dennis was standing at a stop on Broad Street with a woman and a young girl. Walt almost called out to him. But something made him stop. The way Dennis had his hand at the woman's elbow. The way he looked down at the girl when she said something, not the way a man looks at a niece or a neighbor's kid. Walt had seen enough fathers with their children to know what that looked like. He filed it away and said nothing to anyone. Then about a month later he saw them again. Dennis was outside a small ice cream shop with the girl, buying her a cone, listening to her talk with his full attention on her face. Walt stood on the other side of the street for a minute and watched, and by the time he walked away he was certain. He asked around after that. There was a woman he knew slightly, someone who'd worked at a shop in Millhaven her whole life. He mentioned Dennis's name and described him. She knew exactly who he was. Said everyone in Millhaven knew him. Said Patty had been with him for years, that people there knew him as her partner, knew Lily was his daughter. The girl was in 8th grade. People said she looked just like him. He's been part of that life for 15 years, Walt said. Give or take. Carol's hands were in her lap. They had gone cold. 15 years. Lily was 14. Carol did the math without meaning to, and then she couldn't stop counting back through Wednesdays and Sundays, through fishing trips and late shifts. Through every evening she'd kept a plate warm and not asked questions because she trusted him. Because of course, she trusted him. 26 years. Why wouldn't she? Does Ruth know? Walt looked at her for a moment before he answered. Yes, he said. She's known for a while. Carol sat with that. The geranium on the windowsill. The oilcloth worn pale at the corners. The photographs of a family that was gone. She sat with it until she could stand up. Then she stood up, thanked him, and went back out into the August heat. The walk back across the yard took maybe 30 seconds. It felt longer. She could hear them through the kitchen window as she came up toward the porch, Ruth describing something about the garden, Dennis giving short answers in the way he did when he wasn't really listening. Carol went up the steps and through the screen door. Dennis was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. Ruth stood at the stove with her back to the door. Carol said she needed to talk to Dennis outside. Alone. Ruth didn't turn around. But her back changed, something went careful in it. Dennis looked at Carol for a second, then pushed off the counter. Sure, he said, easy, like it was nothing. He followed her out. In the yard he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a cigarette. He almost never smoked, hadn't in years, as far as Carol knew, only when something was pressing on him that he wasn't ready to name. He lit it and looked out toward the road. Carol said it straight. A neighbor had told her about Patty. And about Lily. The cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. The color went out of his face, steadily visible even through the summer tan. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Not moving. Not saying anything. Then he exhaled slowly and looked at the ground. Damn, he said. Quiet. Almost to himself. That was all. No correction. No version of "that's not what you think." Just the one word landing the way it lands when a man has been caught and already knows there's no point in running. Carol asked him directly. He confirmed it. Yes. She asked him to tell her everything. He sat down on the porch step, held the cigarette without smoking it, and looked somewhere past the garden fence. He met Patty about 14 years ago. His plant had a long-running contract with a warehouse on the east side of Millhaven, a parts depot they supplied regularly, and he made the drive out there at least twice a month for years. The county library branch was half a block from the warehouse. He stopped in once to use the copier. She was working the desk. They talked for a few minutes. He came back the next time he was in town. And the time after that. After a while he didn't need the warehouse as an excuse. The drive had become its own habit. He said it was easy with her in a way he didn't know how to explain without making it sound like something Carol had done wrong, which he said she hadn't. He said with Carol everything had always been about managing something. The mortgage, the car, his mother, the next thing on the list. With Patty he just sat down and the hour went somewhere without either of them trying. He said he felt like he could breathe. Carol asked, didn't we talk? He said, yes. But differently. Like partners, he said. Like two people running the same operation. He stopped there and didn't finish the sentence. When Patty told him she was pregnant, he didn't know what to do. He thought about ending the marriage and doing the right thing cleanly. But he couldn't make himself do it. Carol hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't deserve to have her life taken apart because of something he'd done. So he kept both. He said it just like that, kept both, the way you'd say you kept 2 sets of keys. He said he loved Carol. He said he also loved Patty, but differently. 2 different things. 2 different lives. He said he loved her. He said it like it was supposed to balance something. Maybe he even believed it. That was the part Carol couldn't shake, not that he was lying, but that he probably wasn't. She waited until her voice would come out level. Then she asked about Ruth. Yes, he said. His mother had known for years. There were times his paycheck didn't cover both households, Lily's school things, a car repair for Patty, whatever came up, and he'd asked Ruth for help. Ruth had given it and told him it was his business to sort out. Carol looked at the ground for a moment. Then she told him she was going home. She went back inside alone. Ruth had moved to the kitchen window. She turned when Carol came through the screen door. Her face was composed the way it always was, but her eyes were doing something, careful reading Carol, measuring. Carol didn't give her a way around it. She said, you knew. All these years you knew and said nothing. Ruth set the dish towel on the counter. She didn't deny it. She said it wasn't her place to get between a husband and wife. Carol said she had been her son's wife for 26 years. That she had a right to know. Ruth looked at her steadily. What would it have changed, she said. You would have left. Dennis would have been miserable. The way it was, you had a life. A home. You weren't unhappy. She said it without apology. As if unhappiness you don't know about doesn't count. As if the not knowing was something she'd done for Carol rather than to her. Carol picked up her purse from the chair where she'd left it. She looked at Ruth one more time, the straight back, the composed face. The woman who had eaten her pie and taken her medication refills and given her that brief nod at the door for 26 years and told her she wouldn't be coming back. Ruth said nothing. Carol walked out. Dennis was at the gate. He stepped into her path, not grabbing, just blocking. He said her name. He said he didn't want to lose her. He said they could talk on the drive home, 2.5 hours, they could work through it, he just needed her to wait. She told him to move. He said her name again. She said it louder. Move. He stepped aside. She walked through the gate and out onto the road without looking back. The August sun came down hard on her shoulders. She kept walking past the neighboring houses, past the overgrown lot on the corner toward the center of town where she knew there was a bus stop outside the Dollar General. Peace. Ruth had called it peace. 26 years of not knowing, and that was supposed to be the gift she'd been given. Carol thought about that the whole ride home. The bus came 40 minutes later, half empty, cool inside from the air conditioning. Carol got on, found a window seat toward the back and sat down. She didn't cry on the way home. She had expected to, and she didn't. She just watched Pennsylvania move past the glass, the same farmland and old coal towns she'd watched that morning on the way out, looking completely different now, and she started, quietly and without rushing, to think about what came next. She got home after dark. The trip back took close to 3 hours with the transfer, and by the time she walked up to the front door the sky was fully black and the neighborhood was quiet. She went inside and turned on the light and stood there for a moment looking at the house. The couch. The coffee table. The television Dennis liked to have on by 7 whether he was watching it or not. Everything exactly where it always was. She lay down on the couch without changing her clothes and looked at the ceiling. This was the first night in 26 years she was sleeping here alone. Not the first night Dennis had stayed somewhere else. There had been work trips a week at his mother's one winter when Ruth had been sick. But those nights she had known where he was. This was different. Dennis called the next morning before she left for work. She didn't answer. He called again that evening. She let it go to voicemail. He called every day after that, sometimes twice. She didn't pick up once. She went to work. 8 hours at her register running items through, saying the same things she always said. She came home and didn't eat much and didn't sleep well and lay in the dark going back through things she had never let herself examine directly. The Wednesday nights he said he was staying late at the plant. The Sunday fishing trips with a friend she had never once met. The phone calls taken in the other room with the door pulled most of the way closed. Out of all the things she turned over in those nights, the one that stayed with her longest was the simplest. She had never once questioned the Millhaven trips. He made that drive for years, said it was for work, and she had nodded and asked what time he'd be home. The warehouse contract had been real. That was the part that made it hard to call herself careless. He had built the lie on something true. On the 8th day he showed up at the front door around 7 in the evening with a grocery bag, bread, milk. A few things from the deli counter, the way he'd come home from work 1,000 times before. He came inside and set the bag on the kitchen table and said he wanted to fix it. He would end things with Patty. He would stay. He just needed her to give him the chance. Carol asked him about Lily. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He looked at the table. That silence was its own answer, and they both knew it. She asked him to leave. Not permanently, she said. She just needed time in the house alone. Time to think without managing around him. He stood there for a moment, then nodded and went to the bedroom and packed a bag. Razor, a few shirts, enough for a week or two. He came back through the front room and stopped at the door and said her name once, like he might add something. Then he went out and pulled the doors shut behind him. Carol stood in the quiet and waited to feel what she expected to feel. What came instead was relief. Plain and unfamiliar and completely real. A month passed, then most of a second one. Carol had expected the alone to feel like loss. Sometimes it did. But mostly it felt like something she hadn't known was missing, space that hadn't existed before. No television running from 7 until Dennis fell asleep in the armchair. No one asking what was for dinner before she'd had 5 minutes to put her bag down. She could leave a cup in the sink overnight. She could go to bed when she wanted or not go to bed at all. Small freedoms, but they accumulated into something she didn't have a name for yet. She found a box in the closet one evening, brushes, old tubes of acrylic, a sketch pad with the cover warped from sitting too long. She had painted before the marriage. Nothing serious, just something she did when she had an afternoon with nowhere to be. She couldn't remember when she'd stopped. She drove to the art supply store and bought a small canvas and a few new colors and set up at the kitchen table. What she made that first evening wasn't much, but it was hers entirely, and she did it again the next night and the one after that. She enrolled in a continuing ed drawing class at the community college. She'd seen the catalog at work for years and never signed up. Now she did. Tuesday evenings, a room full of adults at folding tables, a retired teacher making small corrections. Carol didn't care that she wasn't particularly good at it. That wasn't why she was there. She had spent 26 years being Dennis's wife. Somewhere in there she had forgotten to keep being herself. It turned out she was still in there, just waiting. There was a woman in the class named Diane, recently divorced, direct, the kind of person who said exactly what she thought without being unkind about it. They started getting coffee after class at the place down the block from campus, and somewhere around the third or fourth week, Carol laughed at something. Diane said really laughed, without expecting to, and realized she hadn't done that in longer than she could place. Dennis called occasionally. They met twice at a diner, neutral ground coffee going lukewarm, while he asked when she was going to decide. She said she didn't know. He looked tired. She probably did too. She still didn't know what she was going to decide, but she was becoming certain that whatever it was, it would not involve going back to the life she'd had before August. She just hadn't found the words for it yet. It was a Tuesday evening in early November, about 3 months after the drive to Ruthstown. Carol was at the kitchen table with a canvas propped against a stack of books, working on something that had started as a landscape and become something harder to name. The radio was low. The house was quiet in the way she had gotten used to. The doorbell rang. The girl on the other side of the door was about 14, slight dark hair, pulled back, a jacket a little thin for the weather. She had a small backpack over one shoulder, and she was standing very straight. Carol looked at her face and then at her eyes, which were a clear and steady gray. Dennis's eyes. Exactly. Are you Carol? The girl said. Carol said yes. I'm Lily. She said it without drama, just putting it down between them like something that needed to be established before anything else could happen. I know you know who I am. Carol stepped back and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. Carol put the kettle on because she needed something to do with her hands. Lily had taken the county bus from Millhaven to the transit center downtown and walked the rest of the way. She'd looked up the address herself. Nobody had sent her. Her mother didn't know she was here. Her father didn't know either. Lily said she had always known about Carol. Her father had told her when she was 7, sat down with her and explained in whatever words you use with a 7-year-old that he loved 2 people, and that was just the way things were. She had grown up with this, the way kids grow up with the particular facts of their own lives, as simply something that was true. She said her father cried on the phone to her mother almost every night now. Her mother cried too and kept saying it was her fault, that she should never have agreed to any of it. Lily said she had started to wonder if it was her fault. If she was the reason everything was falling apart. If things would have been different, better for everybody if she just hadn't been born. Carol looked at this girl, at those gray eyes, Dennis's eyes, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger. Not grief. Something quieter than either of those. A clear, still sorrow for both of them. She told Lily, no. She said it plainly, without softening it. None of this was on her. She had been born because 2 adults made choices, and those choices had consequences, and none of that belonged to a child. The fault was her father's. He had decided 15 years ago and every week since how to live. That decision was his to carry, not Lily's. Lily looked at her for a moment, then nodded. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She said her mother loved Dennis and couldn't seem to stop. She said she sometimes thought it might have been better if he'd just been there every day. Actually, they're not someone who showed up twice a week and then left again. She said the leaving was the part that never got easier to watch. Before she stood up to go, she said there was something she'd been thinking about. Her mother always said love couldn't be divided, that you either loved one person or you didn't, that splitting it meant neither side was real. Her father said that wasn't true, that love could be genuine for more than one person at once. She asked Carol who was right. Carol thought about it honestly. Then she said she didn't know. Maybe both of them were right in some way. Maybe neither of them was. She said that was probably something everyone had to work out for themselves and that the answer might depend on what you needed love to be. Lily considered that. She picked up her backpack and said she was sorry for coming without calling. Carol walked her to the door. On the step, Lily turned and said her father had never lied about one thing. He'd always said Carol was a good person. She said it mattered to her to see that for herself. Then she went down the front walk. Carol watched her go, and when she couldn't see her anymore, she closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long moment. The radio was still on in the kitchen. The canvas still propped against its books. She knew what she was going to do. They met at a diner a week later, a booth by the window, coffee. Neither of them touched much. Carol told him she wanted a divorce. Dennis went pale the same way he had in Ruth's yard, not sudden, just a slow draining. He said he would end things with Patty. He would do it that week. He just needed one more chance. She asked about Lily. He didn't answer. He looked at the table, and the silence said everything that needed to be said. Carol told him she wasn't asking him to walk away from his daughter. Lily was 14 years old and she needed her father, and Carol was not going to ask him to undo that. But she was not going to spend whatever years she had left as a part-time wife to a man whose life was divided somewhere she couldn't see. She had already done that for 15 years without knowing it. She was not going to do it knowing. Dennis nodded slowly. He said the house was hers, he wouldn't contest it. He said he'd sign whatever a mediator put in front of him if she wanted to keep it straightforward, or go through lawyers if she preferred, whatever made it easier for her. He just didn't want it to be a fight. They sat a little while longer. The coffee went cold. Then he left and Carol stayed, and that was more or less how 26 years ended, quietly in a booth by the window on a gray Tuesday morning in late November. She doesn't regret it. Better to know the truth at 48 than to carry a comfortable lie to 60 and look back wondering what she might have done with the years she had. She works. She paints. On Tuesday evenings, she goes to her class, and lately she and Diane have been closing the place down after talking until the staff starts stacking chairs. A few weeks ago, she met a man in the park on a Saturday afternoon. They walked for a while and talked and exchanged numbers, and she doesn't know yet where that goes. But the not knowing feels different now. It feels like something that belongs to her. If you found out the way Carol did, not from a fight, not from a confession, but from a stranger at a fence on an ordinary Saturday morning, would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed and tried to make it work? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know what you think.